Um, so I'll go through a quick presentation of the company for those who don't know what we do and don't have the updated numbers. Oops. Here we go. So I'll start with the slides I've shown. I think I've shown this slide like 100 times, but I got like the best explanation and the best story on this slide a few months ago. So I was in Silicon Valley with, let's call that like a large tech companies in Silicon Valley, and I was showing a quick presentation on BlaBlaCar, and I had this slide. And before I even talked, the guy stopped and he said, "Wow, I understand why you guys are worth $1 billion now." And I was like, "Wow, okay, that's pretty amazing," because usually it takes me a few slides actually before we even get there. And he said, "Well, look, you take like old divorced men and you find them a wife and 2 kids, and that's like a pretty it's a pretty good proposition." And so I wish we had that business. We would be worth a lot more, I guess. What we do is probably not as disruptive. But essentially what we do is we enable people to share car journeys between cities, right? So if you think of today, if you're this guy and you're driving from Paris to Brussels and you drive alone, actually the cost of driving is roughly 80 euro, right? So it would cost you 80 euro in terms of like petrol, depreciation of the vehicle, insurance you pay, and so on and so on. And the proposition here is that instead of driving alone for that journey you would do anyway, you offer your empty seats to passengers going the same way. So you end up with like 3 people in the car, essentially paying 20 euro, and the driver is going to offset his or her cost and pay only 20 euro as well. So you have this sort of sharing paradigm where people are going to share the cost of that journey, enabling on one hand the driver to save actually tons of money, and on the other hand, actually the passengers are going to travel for sometime like a fifth or a fourth of what a train ticket would be or what driving alone would be. So that's what we've been building, and if you look at the BlaBlaCar product, it ends up being really 2 things. It ends up being like a travel site, in a way, or a travel app, where people go and post rides as drivers, or people as passengers would go on the website or mobile app and search for rides, and they would book these empty seats, very much like they would book like a train ticket or a plane ticket. But then you have the other side of the product, which is very much this trusted community, where essentially what you care about is to see how many reviews those drivers or those passengers have, how many verifications we've done, so that you become comfortable booking a seat in someone else's car because you have all this added information. So it's a mix of like a community, really, and a travel site. And that's what we've been building and working on in the last 5 years. So one of the misconceptions actually we have very often when we describe what we do is people tend to think very quickly about carpooling and commuting. And in fact, today, BlaBlaCar is very much used for traveling and not so much for commuting. And you can see that essentially through the average distance of 220 miles, right? So that's the average distance people tend to do in Europe or in new countries like India, Mexico, Turkey, that we opened recently. People do pretty long legs, so it's really about traveling. And 60% of that actually takes place on weekends. So we're pretty far from like the short distance and weekday commuting activity, and we're really into sort of like traveling and sometimes leisure type activity. And if you think at the more sort of global scale, today I think you really have 2 things happening, or 2 different type of activities emerging. So on one end you have ride sharing, or what's today called ride sharing, which is a bit of a misnomer in fact, which is the old on-demand activities a la Uber, Halo, Grab Taxi, Didi in China, and so on, where in a sense it's about very short distances within a city. So it's me going to the office to NOAH to give this speech and taking an Uber. It's actually a play where you pay typically like 1 to 3 euro per mile, and where the driver is actually doing a job. So whether it's regulated or not regulated is a different debate, but at the end of the day, it's doing a job carrying you from point A to point B, and for you as a passenger, you're just buying a service. And then you have another side, which is what we do, which is not really on demand, it's scheduled. So for us, it's not like an on-demand thing. You don't decide to go from Paris to Brussels last minute. Typically, you decide hours in advance, sometimes days in advance. So it's a scheduled activity, just like you would take a plane or a train long distance. We tend to do these long distances, as I mentioned. But it's also very much community-based, in a sense that the driver doesn't drive to carry you between Paris and Brussels. He's going to drive because he has to drive for other reasons, and he ends up sharing that ride with passengers. And then because it's all based on sharing that cost, essentially we end up with a price structure that's completely different, right? So if you think on a per mile basis, the on-demand market would be at like 1 to 3 euro per mile. And that's what you see when you take your Uber or Halo or any other substitute. and we end up at 10 cents per mile, right? So it's a complete different paradigm. It's like a 10 to 20x cheaper on a per mile basis because it's based on sharing, because at the end of the day, you're not paying for the driver because he or she's doing that anyway. Another misconception actually is that very early on people thought it's really about students. And in reality, it's not quite about students. Like Ellen is a good example of, a pretty typical in a way example of drivers we have. She's British, she's 52, so she's not a student anymore. She received like tons of reviews on the website. She's doing this journey between London and Truro in the UK, and she's saving like £4,000 essentially per year, which is pretty significant if you think of the economic impact on people. Like she's saving that amount of money for something you do anyway is a pretty significant economic impact. So quickly, that's sort of the distribution of people actually using BlaBlaCar. So we have students, it's 20%, so it's a bit higher than general population, but not much. But it's mostly employed people. It's mostly like sort of like average middle class people using the service, and then 9% being retired or unemployed people. So let's talk a bit about numbers, because I guess all of that would not matter if it was at very low scale. So let's talk about how we positively disrupt the city-to-city transport market. So first of all, we're building very quickly a very large community, right? So today, if you look at the number of members who actually signed up to BlaBlaCar and use BlaBlaCar, we're getting to 25 million people in Europe, India, Russia, and all the other markets we opened recently. So it's a pretty massive community, and as you can see from this chart, it's actually not slowing down, it's actually accelerating. It's accelerating because we see very high penetration in all the markets where we operate. So today we still see very high growth in countries like France, where we've been for several years, and that's the most established market. Very high penetration in most European markets, so very high growth, and we're opening new markets. So you have this sort of double effect of increased penetration and increased footprint of the activity. So today we're in 20 countries. We're going to open Brazil in December, so very soon. So we're pretty much in all major European countries, plus Russia, India, Mexico, and very soon Brazil. So the way, obviously the way we've done this international expansion was also by funding the company. So we had to be pretty aggressive at some point about funding that expansion and funding that big market and being the first company to really grab and create liquidity in these different markets. So the first actually investor who believed in the company was Isai, who backed the company in 2009 with 1.2 million. We've put 600K initially with angels and ourselves actually to kickstart. So 1.2 million in 2010, which was really to prove the business model in the core market in France, right? So it was really about like proving the activity, proving people actually do this city ride sharing. Then we went to another phase in early 2012 when we realized that no one was actually doing that outside of France except one company in Germany. But no one was doing that in any other countries in Europe, no one was doing that in any other country in the world, no one was doing that in the US. So we thought we had a pretty unique shot at like building that on a European scale. And Excel actually backed that strategy in 2012 with $10 million. And in 2014, we decided, because it was working pretty much all over Europe, or it was starting to be proven all over Europe, we accelerated by raising $100 million in 2014, led by Index Ventures and LeadEdge. And in 2015, we doubled down because we've seen pretty phenomenal growth in Russia, in India, and we realized that emerging markets actually have even a bigger potential than Europe. So obviously, we've been financing that growth. Now, the key number we track actually beyond the community, which matters obviously, is how many people travel through BlaBlaCar, right? How many people do we carry on a monthly or quarterly basis? And I think a couple of years ago, I was saying like we're pretty close to carrying as many people as the Eurostar. Today, we're much bigger than the Eurostar, actually. So today, we carry 10 million travelers on a quarterly basis. And to give you a sense, so it's 40 million on a yearly basis. The biggest airline in the world is roughly 150 million travelers on a yearly basis. So even though it's not quite comparable in terms of distances, it's interesting because it means that in a couple of years, more people will travel through BlaBlaCar than Delta Airlines, right? So that's the scale of the transport network, or the community-based transport network we are creating. So very quickly, how it translates into is, within a few years, actually, we've become the first ground transport website actually in Europe in terms of traffic, right? So if you look at different countries, we're either number 2 or number 3 in France, Italy, Spain, or Germany. But what's interesting here is just traffic numbers, which are not that interesting at the end of the day, but what's interesting is we capture the audience. So it means today we become like one of the first sites people go and visit when they want to travel between Paris and Brussels or Munich and Berlin. So we essentially capture the audience more so than traditional transport network. One of the reasons, and that's going to be almost my last slide, I have a short video at the end to show you how it translates visually, which should be pretty interesting. The reason it gets so big and something people don't quite get today is we don't just disrupt actually buses and trains. Actually, what we fundamentally disrupt is the way people use their car, right? So if you look at transport in Europe, you realize that 76% of transport between cities is actually done by car, right? So more people travel by car between cities than trains or buses. And the biggest part of our market is actually convincing people not to take their car and to become passengers in someone else's car. And once you untap essentially this market, you untap a market that's even bigger than the rail industry or for sure the bus industry or the plane industry for the distances we do. So that's a number from a consulting company. So now to give you a sense of how it translates, visually, we've done this representation on the world map of where the BlaBlaCars are going on a global scale. And I'll just end with that, if the video can start. So we start from Moscow, actually, that we launched. So we launched Russia like 9 months ago. And every dot is actually a BlaBlaCar driver just doing a journey. And it's just on one day, right? And you can see most of the activity picks up during the afternoon and the evening. And then you see like a global map. Obviously, we're going into Europe, where we have more activity. So it gives you a sense of like the density of the transport network created at like 6 or 7 p.m. All over Europe and Russia. You see Turkey actually lighting up as well. Thank you.
I have two questions. I have two questions for you. Question number one: was this guy Will Ferrell on the photo in the car on the right side, the one who was driving? Will Ferrell, the American actor?
No, I wish. I lost my mic.
Yeah, we need Mike. Mike.
I'm timed out.
Mike. Mike, put the mic on, please.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Here we go. All right. No, it's not. I wish it was.
But is it a good marketing idea to get some famous people sharing a ride with? And
yeah, it's something we haven't done actually. So we had a few doing that naturally and tweeting about it. So we had like some sports stars in France, in Germany, actually doing that and tweeting that they're doing BlaBlaCar. So in a way, it's happening on its own. But yeah, maybe. Why not?
As you know, as a conference organizer, we love dating. We're organizing a lot of dates here, and that's why people are all over the building. How many kind of marriages came out of these shared drives?
So many is the answer. So I'm sure we have many dates, many weddings, many companies have been formed, rock bands and everything. I don't have the exact number on weddings, but at the end of the day, we're putting like 4 million people together for like 3 or 4 hours every month, right?
Any fist fights yet?
Any fist fights? I'm not sure, no. We're trying to avoid that, essentially. That's the old trusted community concept.
So last question. I like this little ants map when the things move around. It's awesome. And we had a similar chart yesterday from Auto1, which covered all of Europe in terms of the car dealers. I realized that Germany was quite active, right? And you're a French company, and you're going pan-European and Turkey, etc. You seem to be very successful in Germany. How is that?
Well, it was in essentially, if you look at that map, we're very successful all over Europe. The UK is a bit of the exception, actually, in terms of density of traffic. So you could see Germany is super busy, Spain is super busy, Italy is super busy. So 3 years ago, we decided that we have to be European, right? So we have to change the DNA of the company and be European. And we've done that by staffing the company with lots of people all over Europe, number one. But we've also done that by M&A, right? So we acquired a company in Italy, we acquired a company in Germany, we acquired a company in Poland. So we've done a mix of like acquire hiring and staffing, which is how we scaled very fast all across Europe. So Germany is very big for us, as you could see.
So if or when Travis from Uber calls you and asks you, hey guys, nice what you do there, but do you want to be part of a bigger thing? Not necessarily an acquisition, but would you, if Travis asked you joining the Uber platform as a booking alternative, agree to that?
But I think today, look, I don't know. We never had this call. But at the end of the day, I think we're building two very different things. So there is almost like some semantic confusion because we all call that ride sharing. But if you think of what we're actually building, we're building a community of people sharing rides between cities, people that probably never used Uber. It's a very different price point, very different population. And at the end of the day, what's interesting in what we do is 25 million people, we have like a depth of data that's pretty amazing on the community, and we can build lots of things on long-distance city-to-city transport. Uber is doing something phenomenal on the on-demand in-city market. So at the end, I don't see like the two companies crossing path anytime soon. I don't think it's a discussion we'll have anytime soon.
How big is the paid transportation market globally? 50 billion or something like this. I think it's like 12 billion in the US alone.
Yep.
So it's a big market. So there's space for everyone, like the conference market. Nicolas, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.
And see you in Berlin. It's an important market for you.
Thanks.